All right, golfers, I want to talk a little bit about momentum to you guys. You'll often hear this idea that the golf swing is not a game of positions, but rather it's one dynamic movement. And that stands true in one particular case that I come across far beyond the others. And that's when the club gets too far inside with not enough wrist set. And then there's a lot of late hinging happening, and that kind of motion carries into the transition. And I see this from golfers of all skill levels. Obviously, the higher handicappers typically will struggle with it more than others. But basically, it's when the forearms will rotate really open, the club will get very inside. And then in reaction to that, there's either a change of forearm direction, a separation of the trail elbow, or something to try to get the club up in the air. But the problem is this club, when it starts going there, obviously there's momentum being done, right? Because of gravity, you'll see how this club will keep kind of traveling in that fashion. So the problem is if that club starts to tip over as you are transitioning and starting your downswing, look at how the momentum wants to carry the club steeper on the way down because of the fact that it's getting a lot steeper late in the backswing, that it will carry over into the transition, especially if you're somebody who transitions really quickly into the ball. And so the problem is you'll see that, right? It's like inside, up, and then it carries over into the transition as I'm turning because the club is still getting vertical as I start down. And so at the top of the backswing, in theory, it might look like a pretty good spot, but you don't see the fact that the club is going this way and the body is going to help carry it into a steeper position. And then either the higher handicapper will rotate really well and cut across it. The better player usually from there will react in some fashion with a lot of trail side bend, a lot of early extension to try to make it work. Then you have to save it with the hands, and it kind of snowballs into other problems. And so in this situation, what we would want to do is we would want to try to get the club leveraged up in the air a little earlier with some hinge so that we can actually set the club at the top and let the momentum carry it back behind you. And even if it doesn't organically happen, you can certainly influence it in that way because now the weight of the club is a lot more upright early to drop back later, as opposed to really inside early where it's standing up really late that carries into the transition for many of you. And so there's one particular feel I like to give people, which is basically referencing the thumbs. So what does that mean? It means that if the club goes back really flat, where are my thumbs going to point really early? They're going to point behind my body. If I stand this club up really late, where are the thumbs going late in my backswing? Well, they're going from being pointed behind me to pointed very upright, and then on the way down, still pointing either very upright or in front of my body, right? And so you'll look at it like this. Thumbs now point up, and then the thumbs are going to be staying pointed up late in my downswing where I then have to react to it. So instead, if we're trying to get the club hinged upwards, well, we want to actually get the thumbs pointed more vertical early in the backswing so that we can then drop and point the thumbs behind the body into the transition. Literally as simple as a visual cue of the thumbs can really help golfers to trace out a better pattern with the club. Right? Of course, there's, pressing down on the handle with the lead wrist, which I've talked about, or just trying to hinge it more vertically through the wrist joints themselves, right? But if you just think about where your thumbs are in space throughout the golf swing, you can actually get this club standing up earlier to then point the thumbs more back behind the body in transition. And now all of a sudden, you're actually going to get the club dropping in the correct fashion at the start of your downswing instead of getting it really penalized early where you then have to react to it. And bear in mind, not every single inside takeaway is a problem. I've said this numerous times before. If your club gets inside early, but the top of the backswing doesn't get compromised by it and the transition doesn't get compromised by it, you can fully leave the inside takeaway or the flatter takeaway alone. There's countless examples of this. One of my own players on the Corn Ferry Tour does this really well. But if you're somebody who, if you actually trace back the root of the problem, it stems from the fact that you don't hinge it very well and the club goes inside and it's creating this snowball effect, then of course there's a reason to change the takeaway in that fashion or in that scenario. That's where we would clean it up. So set up to the ball, still making a nice big turn. Use your thumbs to hinge the club up, point the thumbs to the sky early as you set the club, and then point the thumbs behind you in transition. All of a sudden, you're going to start to shallow this club, which will incentivize your body to start rotating. So using the thumbs as a visual cue can be super helpful for many of you.